right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for being here at the Sixth Floor Museum at Dealey Plaza. My name is Stephen Fagin. I'm the curator here at the museum, and this program is called A Living History, and it's an opportunity, now that you've toured the exhibit, to get to meet and interact with someone who lived the experience of the Kennedy assassination. And we have a very special guest here today, because not only did Karen Westbrook Scranton witness the assassination of President Kennedy, but she was actually employed here in the Texas School Book Depository building at the time all of this happened. So there's a really interesting story here. I understand that most of you are about 16 or 17 years old. Is that right? Karen was 18 when she came to work here. So imagine for a moment she was your age or a year or so older when all of this took place. It's a really extraordinary thing, and it's why we do programs like this, so that you can experience history through the eyes of someone who lived it. So please join me in welcoming Karen Scranton to be our guest today. Karen, let's take a look at you back at age 18. There you are. This is your high school yearbook photo?
Yes.
All right. Now, explain to us how an 18-year-old comes to work in a downtown warehouse like this.
Well, I went to South Oak Cliff High School, and I did very well in shorthand and typing. And I know that shorthand isn't done anymore, but I did do very well in it. And the Schoolbook Depository, the supervisor of Southwestern Publishing Company, called the school and said, "Do you have anybody who is really good at shorthand and typing? Because we have a stenographer's position open." And so my teachers recommended me. And so that was how we set up an interview. And I came down one day after school to interview with them for the job as soon as I graduated from high school.
And here's the building as it appeared around that time. And, you know, when this photograph was taken, it was considered one of the world's most photographed structures, one of the most famous warehouses in the world. But when you first came down for your interview, you
Not so much. Not so much. I rode the bus from Oak Cliff to downtown, and I went all up and down Elm Street asking people, "Do you know where the Schoolbook Depository is?" And nobody knew. Nobody had ever heard of it. The building was semi-condemned at the time. They had restored the first 2 or 3 stories, I believe, for publishing companies, but the subsequent floors were still condemned, and so the depository used those to store boxes and books and that sort of thing. And so because I had so much trouble finding it, I was actually late for my interview. It's interesting for me to say I was late for an interview because I've spent my career in human resources, and that's one of the things is a no-no. You don't be late for an interview, so it kind of came around to me in that form.
But you obviously got the job.
I got the job. And all we did, I'm sure this is all outdated for y'all, but for a stenographer, all we did was take shorthand and type it up. So I would take pages and pages and pages of shorthand. And what we did, it was a publishing company, and we were trying to get schools, school districts, to adopt the school books that Southwestern published. And so that was what I did. I typed up letters to all these school districts, these school district officials, telling them all about our school books and so forth, and trying to get them to adopt our books for their schools.
Now, while the outside of the School Book Depository, what you guys saw today when you arrived, looks very much like it did in 1963, the inside has changed quite a bit. So I wanted to show you some pictures. These are actually crime scene photographs taken by the FBI and some by the Dallas Police Department. But let's take a look at the ground floor. Now, first of all, Karen, where would you park your car in 1963?
We parked it behind, over in the railroad tracks. There was railroad tracks and just gravel lots back there. So we parked it behind the building. This is the front entrance, which is the one that we came in, rather than, is that entrance still available even? I'm not sure.
Yes.
Okay.
This is, as you're coming down corner of Houston and Elm Street, there's a little extension, 1 lane of Elm, and this is the main entrance to the School Book Depository. It's today the main entrance to what is now called the Dallas County Administration Building.
That's right.
But it looks a little different. We have it looks like a radiator there on the right-hand side. And then on the left is something you really don't see much of anymore. That's a cigarette machine, which was, I'm sure, very popular in the early 1960s. So you would walk in the building. This was how all the employees came in. You wouldn't go through the loading dock on the back side?
We didn't. We didn't. We came through the front.
Okay. And then we're going to turn now to our right. And so this is the other side. You can see in the bottom right-hand corner, the other side of that cigarette machine. And then what are we looking at here, this staircase?
The stairway, this was what we would take to go up to the second floor, which was where I worked at Southwestern.
Okay.
I believe there was an elevator there, but I think I usually took the stairs. Was there an elevator?
Yeah, I think, are we talking about that doorway that's right
Yes,
there?
yes.
There's an elevator in there?
Right.
Okay. So as you mentioned, basically the textbook, this was a textbook distribution warehouse, the Texas School Book Depository Company.
Mm-hmm.
The first 4 floors were regional offices for different educational textbook manufacturers, publishers, and then floors 5, 6, and 7 were just open storage for school textbooks, like the photographs of the crime scene that you saw downstairs.
That's correct.
And here is Southwestern Publishing. This is
Right.
your office on the second floor.
This is my office. I remember it well.
Tell us what we're looking at here and any equipment that you see that maybe we wouldn't recognize today.
Well, first of all, you see a whole big stack of file cabinets there. Instead of computer files that we have these days, we didn't have computers then, and so that was where we kept all of the paper files. And then there's our typewriters. We had typewriters, and we even had some manual typewriters where you have to knock the roller to go across.
This was the time when there was that switch between manual and electric.
We were just beginning to move into the Selectric and the electric machines,
Okay.
right?
Now tell us the difference between the two and the difficulty you would have in using one versus the other.
On the manual versus the electric, oh my goodness, it was all the difference in the world. You know, you couldn't type as fast and you had to press harder, and with the electric, you would make a lot of mistakes because you weren't used to the buttons going down so fast, the keys hitting the keys so fast. So it was a lot of difference, and you would reach up to make the cart go across, and you didn't need to do that. So it was quite an adjustment to make.
Never imagining at the time you'd be texting on your iPhone.
Never in a
50 years
million
later.
years. I mean, I still struggle with everything we do with that phone when I remember this kind of a picture. You know, we had these humongous adding machines that were all very manual. It was a different world, guys. Very different world.
Now, the desk that you had is in the far southeast corner. So in this picture, we're talking about the corner that's on the right-hand side of this image. And southeast corner is important because you were on the second floor, southeast corner, and the sniper's nest, that evidentiary area you saw downstairs, was the same spot directly above on the 6th floor.
Right.
Now, back there at the back, what looks like a window, is that where your supervisor or boss worked?
No, she worked up in this area, I believe. I think I was in the far back corner, and she worked up in this area. Is the way I remember it, Stephen.
Now, as a stenographer, who would you typically take dictation from, or how would that work?
From the supervisor, from Dottie.
Okay,
Dottie Lovelady. Yes, she would call each of us up one at a time and dictate all of the letters, and we'd go back to our desks and type them up and take them to her. Kind of boring.
Sounds exciting.
Yeah.
All right.
You can understand why I went to college and got another job.
This is just important because today we don't recognize exactly what went on inside the depository. We know this building as the site of the Kennedy assassination, but it's interesting to remember that this is a place where people worked and did their jobs, and this is where schools would order textbooks that would be sent out to North Texas and all the surrounding states as well. This is the outside of the building. This is a picture taken on November 22nd. You can see there's some detectives and police officers outside, but I want to draw your attention to a sign, not the big Texas School Book Depository sign, which we actually have in our collection today, that original sign, but there's another sign that's on the corner of the building, and I'll show you another picture. This is a same day, a little bit earlier, but this is a color photograph taken by a bystander, but again, on the right-hand side of the picture, you can see that sign, and we have that sign today in our collection, and here it is. It listed all the publishing companies that actually had offices inside the School Book Depository. It's an artifact that you don't see very often. And at the very bottom, Karen, that's your company, Southwestern Publishing, which was one of the smaller ones. Is that right?
It was. Yes, it was. Macmillan and Scott Forsman were much larger than we were. In fact, I think just about all of them were a little bit larger than we were.
And all these years later, you can't quite remember what types of books Southwestern published.
I can't.
That's okay.
You know.
But certainly you were one of the book publishers in this building. And how big was your staff? How many people?
There were about 7 or 8 of us all together, counting Dottie, I believe.
And many of these ladies who you worked with became important figures because you all witnessed, or most of you witnessed, the assassination on November 22nd. As we lead into this, you were too young to vote for John F. Kennedy, or actually vote at all in the 1960 presidential election. But we were talking earlier, and you mentioned that you weren't exactly a Kennedy fan at that time.
I wasn't at the time. There was a lot of things going on about why he should not be our president, and I was very impressionable at the time, not thinking a whole lot for myself in 1960, but hope that you guys are thinking more for yourselves than I was then. But I certainly, as I was telling you earlier, I would have voted for Bobby. I liked
1968.
In 1968, had he lived, I would have voted for Bobby because I was thinking a little bit more about politics, reading a little bit more aware of things going on. So I feel that I would have voted for him.
And the country had changed a great deal from 60 to
deal.
68. And for many people, that moment of transition happened right outside here, a moment that you were a witness to. In addition to being aware of President Kennedy at that time, there was someone else you had an awareness of, and that was a coworker here in this building named Lee Harvey Oswald.
That's correct.
And you saw Oswald in the lunchroom, often on the second floor. Let's take a look at that. So we're on the second floor, again, same floor that your publishing company is officing on, and this door that we're looking at right here, tell us about that.
Well, that was the door to the lunchroom, but it was always open. We never had to open that door. It's interesting to me that you have a picture of it closed because I've never seen it closed. The door stayed open, and we would go in there for our lunches.
Okay, and so now walking through that door, now we're on the other side. You can see that door through the open door there, and so this is the lunchroom.
Right.
Okay, and there's a candy machine there right inside the entrance, and there's a mirrored surface on that candy machine. If you look really closely, you can actually see a Coke machine reflected in the glass of that candy machine, and that's an important Coke machine because that's where Lee Harvey Oswald was seen, right, standing at that Coke machine right after the assassination within about 90 seconds of the last shot being fired. But Karen, tell us about this room. Sometimes I've heard it referred to as the Domino Room or the lunch room. What was that room like for you on a daily basis?
Well, we typically ate lunch there every day because we were so far down here on Elm and there wasn't as much buildup as there is now. And so we typically always brought our lunch and ate in here every day. And I think just about most of us, took lunch at about the same time. But I wanted to show you all that bank of chairs there that's showing on the left side of that picture. That's where Lee always sat to have lunch, and Lee always sat by himself. I know that he had a good friend. Okay, there it's on the right. The ladies in our group, we always sat in the very back end there that's sitting across. We always sat there for lunch, and Lee always sat here on the right. And I know he had a friend down in the warehouse, but he always ate alone. And he was always reading, and I wish I had a better description to tell y'all about, but he was always reading strange-looking material. It was a few little paper pamphlet kind of things, and he was always reading that during lunch, and we always wondered what he was reading, what he was thinking. He wasn't terribly friendly, but we, being teenagers, we saw this guy all alone, and we felt sorry for him. So we just thought, he doesn't have any friends, or he doesn't make friends very easily. So he was very much in our scope, even though there wasn't any kind of a friendship between any of us.
Now, Oswald didn't work for any of the individual publishing companies. He actually worked for the Schoolbook Depository Company as an order filler. So he would get invoices, and he would go up to the storage floors, 5, 6, and 7, and with a dolly and bring down certain boxes of math books and science books and take them down to the loading dock while you guys worked in the actual publishing offices. Did you know any of the other guys that did the same job as Lee, the other order fillers?
The only one we knew was there was a girl that worked in my office called Gloria Calvert, and her husband worked down there in the warehouse. And so we knew him. He would come up occasionally. But other than him, we didn't know anyone in the warehouse. You
mentioned that you knew Lee had a friend.
Yes.
That was Buell Frazier?
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
Did you know Buell?
I did not know Buell. When we would pass in the hall, he would speak, but there was never a friendship or anything, but at least he would speak, and I knew that he and Lee were sometimes together.
And your supervisor, Dottie Lovelady, her brother, Billy.
That's right. I forgot about Billy. Billy also worked in the warehouse, and he was Dottie Lovelady's brother. And there was a picture after the assassination there was a picture of a guy sitting on those front steps of the depository. And the caption of the newspaper article is "This Lee Harvey Oswald," because it was taken during the motorcade, during the parade. And it was really funny to all of us because we could see how in that grainy newspaper picture that did look like Lee, but it didn't. It wasn't Lee, and it was enough that all of us who knew Bobby Lovelady clearly knew that was Bobby sitting out there on the steps, and I'm sorry, Billy sitting on the steps, and not Lee.
That was one of the earliest of the conspiracy theories, the idea that if Oswald was in the doorway at the time of the assassination, he obviously couldn't be on the 6th floor firing, and all of these comparison photographs were made of Oswald and Billy Lovelady, but it was a joke in the office about it.
It was a terrible joke in the office because we knew exactly that was Billy. There was no doubt in our mind. So it was kind of funny, like you say, the first of the conspiracy theories.
Now back to Lee in the lunchroom. So he wasn't very friendly, wasn't really approachable, reading strange literature, pamphlet-type materials. Did you get a sense about him? Did you have a feeling about him at the time before all this happened?
I don't know that I had a feeling about him at the time, Stephen, other than you just notice those little nuances, the strange material, the keeping to himself. There was just something about him that whenever, after the assassination, and the stories came out about him, it came together. You could actually see Lee thinking that I'm going to change the world, or I've got some greater purpose in my life, or some motive in my life, some agenda. It came together very clearly after the assassination. All those thoughts that you had just when you met him and saw him.
So the profile of Oswald that was presented to the public matched the limited observations you had of him in the lunchroom at the depository.
It did exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That brings us up to November 22nd, 1963. So you go to work in this building, and you find out through the newspaper that the President of the United States is going to be going right by your front door.
We do, and we decide we're going to go out there because we're at the very end of the parade, and so we decided we were going to go see him. And because it was towards the end of the parade, we knew that we could go down a little bit closer to the underpass, and there wouldn't be a lot of crowds. We could stand directly on the curb and get a first-hand view. It had been raining all morning long, and I have naturally curly hair, and it would frizz up in the rain, and so I put on a headscarf before I went down there. I wish I still had that headscarf, because that headscarf is how I can identify myself in the Zapruder film.
Absolutely. Here is the motorcade making that turn from Houston Street onto Elm Street. The assassination is just about to take place. The building directly across there was called the Dow Tex in 1963. Today, 501 Elm Street, that's where our museum store and cafe is located. So you were standing on the north side of Elm, further down. We're about to take a look at you. All right, this is the Zapruder film. Most of you, I'm assuming, have seen the famous Zapruder film of the assassination. Karen is in this film. In fact, I'm going to point her out right now. There she is, right there, right next to the Stemmons Road sign, wearing that blue scarf right there. And who is standing next to you, Karen?
Gloria Calvert.
Okay, no doubt in your mind.
There's no doubt in my mind. I remember that.
Okay, and then next to Gloria?
I believe that's Carol Ann Reed.
Okay, and do you know these other two ladies?
I believe the next one is Carol, and I don't remember Carol's name. They were both Carol, so one was Carol Ann and the other one was just Carol. And I do not remember the next one at all.
Okay. So important, identifying these eyewitnesses, because even to this day, if you go online and start looking up Zapruder film eyewitnesses, you'll find all these debates and arguments about who these ladies are, including Karen, who's sitting right here with us. In fact, Gloria's son has recently surfaced and is interested in identifying his mom, and he disagrees with you. That's
Yes.
why I asked if you were certain that was Gloria. But you were there, and he wasn't born.
Yeah.
So I think that you probably you would probably know, because you worked with Gloria every day, and she had very distinctive red hair.
She had very distinctive red hair. She was a good friend, so I think I trumped Chris on this one.
Okay, all right. Now, obviously, we see the motorcade. We see President Kennedy there. Describe these moments. What was it like to live this?
It was amazing. This was the president. And I think like a lot of people, we were just as excited to see Jackie Kennedy as we were to see the president. And as the motorcade came down, because there was really no one else over there on the Dealey Plaza, the car kind of came a little bit closer to the curb where we were standing. And we were waving and screaming and so excited, and Mrs. Kennedy was just absolutely gorgeous. And she was leaning over the president. We're on the curb here, and she was leaning over the president and pulling her hair out of her eyes as they were waving to us. And that was the image that I remember when the first shot was fired.
In this frame, there's another eyewitness I want to point out who's directly across the street. This fella right here, it looks like he's stepping into the street from the curb. That's an eyewitness named Phil Willis. In a moment, I'm going to show you a picture that he took from the opposite side of the street where you can see Karen from the front. But one more frame of the Zapruder film. Now we see the sign passing, or excuse me, the car passing behind the Stemmons Freeway sign. And Karen, this is about the time that you heard that first shot fired. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
And when I heard the shot fire, not being familiar with gunfire at all, I thought it was a car backfiring. And as everything went into slow motion. I know y'all see that in movies and so forth, but it's really true. When something like that, a moment of that happens, everything seemed to go into slow motion in my mind. And after the first shot was fired, I saw the president's hands gradually come up. And because he was so charming and so outgoing and he could always work a crowd, I thought he was going to hold up his hands and say, you got me, because he heard the backfire too. But of course, the second shot was fired, and that turned out not to be the case.
And we're going to switch now to, okay, I showed you Phil Willis a moment ago, so here's the picture that Mr. Willis took. And he later said that he took this particular image instinctively. He had his finger on the trigger of his camera, and he snapped the shutter at the moment he was startled by the sound of the first shot. So this photograph sort of preserves the moment of the first shot being fired. And then you can see Karen right here. Right there, facing the presidential limousine. There's President Kennedy, and there's Karen, so you get a good sense of just how remarkably close you were at the time all of this started. Now, Karen, I have to also ask you about this fella down here with the umbrella, the so-called umbrella man. He was just a few feet from where you were.
I know, and I have no recollection of him at all. Was not looking that way, was certainly watching the car as it came. And as the car kept on going, then the shot fired that hit him in the head. And I have said so many times in the course of these 54 years, when I don't know my own name, I will remember seeing the president's head explode. It was an awful, awful sight, something that shouldn't have to witness.
Throughout that entire span of time, which even though it felt slow motion to you, in reality it was only about 6 seconds, give or take, you had your eyes on the president the whole time?
The whole time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, the shots are very important. You heard how many total?
I heard 3.
Okay.
And through the years, because we were in the Warren Commission, they took our testimonies for the Warren Commission. So authors who want to put together theories of the true story of the Kennedy assassination, they contacted me for easily 5 or 6 years afterwards. And they would always ask, how many shots did you hear? And they would try to explain away why I only heard 3 when they insisted there were 5 or some other such number. But I heard 3 shots.
Did anyone ever try to get you to change your story?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they would present it in all sorts of ways. They talked about the acoustics in between the buildings and just presented it in a lot of different ways. But I heard 3 shots.
As far as spacing, were the first 2 closer, the second 2? Were they even?
No, they were not even. I mean, even in that short space of time, I heard 2 and then kind of a lull and then 1. And one of the authors who contacted me told me the story. So this is hearsay, but he told me the story that was what Mrs. Kennedy heard. She heard the 2 and then a bit of space and then the 3rd. And this same guy said that the people on the other side of the Dealey Plaza, they heard it differently. They heard 1 and then a space and then 2. But once again, Stephen, they were trying to convince me of the acoustics and the difference that it made. But if indeed Mrs. Kennedy did say the same thing, that would make sense because they were so close to where we were when those shots fired.
As far as the sounds of the shots, did they sound the same, like they came from the same location, or did they sound different?
No, they sounded all the same to me. I had no sense that there was a difference in their intensity. I had no sense that they came from a different location. It was just all the same in that regard.
And the big question, where did they sound like they came from?
They sounded like they came from behind me.
Okay, which would be this building.
Right.
All right. Was there ever really any doubt after the assassination that the shots that you heard came from the depository?
Not in my mind. There was never any doubt in my mind.
Okay.
I know other theories have come out, but there was never any doubt for me.
Did you feel it at that time? Like the shooting has just happened, you're in shock, obviously, at what's just happened, but did you immediately sense those shots came from my building?
I don't know that I thought of it from my building, and not immediately. But after the shots were fired and Clint Hill accompanied and they went on to the hospital, we were just it was in a panic. It was like all of a sudden there was this quiet calm while the shots were fired. And then when everybody realized that the shots were fired, the car sped on, then it erupted in pandemonium and everybody started running every place. So we came back to the building, and in a very short time, the police were in our building, and evidently they felt there was something that came from this building. So it was at that point that we first suspected that maybe there was something from our building.
Did you observe anything that you would consider out of the ordinary, either before or after the assassination, within the crowd or the environment there in the plaza?
No.
Okay.
Nothing seemed out of the ordinary to me, and not out there.
When you saw that fatal shot strike the president, was there any doubt in your mind that he had died?
I don't know that I focused on that he had died. I didn't, I think looking back now with the shot that I saw, how could he have survived? But when I ran back inside the building, I definitely remember calling my mother, who also worked downtown. And I remember saying, "Mother, someone has shot the president." So that makes me think it just hadn't registered to me that he had died yet.
And your mom didn't believe you?
Mom told me that it was a shame that I would joke about such a thing.
And while you were on the phone with her, something happened.
The phones went dead. We didn't get to finish. I told her I was serious, and the phones went dead, and the building was just swarming with policemen. And everybody was just kind of in a panic. And the poor policemen, I think they were probably as much in shock as the rest of us. And I remember very clearly, they were searching everything. They came in, they took roll call of all of us in the building to see make sure we were all still there. And remember the row of filing cabinets that I pointed out? The police had even come in and pulled out all of those filing cabinets. And if you know filing cabinets, they're flat, they're flush against the wall. So in my mind that was in shock at the time, I remember thinking, what in the world did they hope to find behind those filing cabinets? But I kind of think, looking back, that they were probably just as desperately in shock as the rest of us were, and you didn't know what to do.
Were the other stenographers, secretaries in your office, were they all disturbed about this?
Everyone was, and of course, no one sat down. Everybody just sort of milled around and talked about what we saw and wondered how things were and so forth. We didn't have TVs in the office buildings then like they do now, so we didn't know what was going on.
And the police weren't exactly forthcoming with any information?
They weren't at all.
Now, did you see Lee Harvey Oswald at all on November 22nd, that Friday?
No, Stephen, you've never asked me that before. I don't specifically recall seeing him. A lot of times coming in and getting coffee and so forth, we would pass, but I don't recall if I specifically saw Lee that day, personally.
But definitely not after the shooting?
Definitely not after. Now, there's a story. May I tell the story?
Please.
Our offices were around the building, and then there was a center office building, a large bullpen kind of office on the second floor that was the office of the Texas School Book Depository. And they had a supervisor in there called Mrs. Reed. And when we were milling around while the police had us locked in and so forth, we were milling around. Mrs. Reed said that when everybody was walking and milling and so forth, that Lee came to the door with a Coke in his hand and said, "What's all the excitement about?" And Mrs. Reed said she told him, "Oh my God, someone has shot the president." Now, whether that's true, whether that fits in with the timeline, but that was Mrs. Reed's story of seeing Lee after the assassination.
I imagine there were a number of stories about Lee that were shared among employees in the aftermath of this.
Yes.
When did you finally get to go home?
We went home. They kept us there. It was about an hour to an hour and a half. They took roll call. They searched. They came around, got everybody's name, our contact number, told us not to leave town, and they would be in contact with us. So I went home, was in shock, laid down on the sofa in the den, and Mother had the TV on watching the news. And when I woke up, I remember waking up on that sofa, and the TV was on in front of me, and there was Lee, a picture of Lee on the TV. And I listened to them, and it just added to the shock. Not only had I seen someone murdered, I saw the president murdered, and I knew the person that they suspected of murdering him. So it just added on more layers of shock.
Did you continue to watch TV that weekend?
Yes, yes. It was amazing coverage for our time.
Absolutely.
You know.
And on Sunday, Jack Ruby enters the story, shoots Oswald on television. How did you feel about this?
It was just, you go into a non-belief. I had gone to church on that Sunday, and when we were leaving church and everybody was getting in their cars, some had already started the cars and had the radio on. And so there in the church parking lot, I learned that he had shot Lee.
Monday was the day of the funeral, and so you would have gone back to work on Tuesday.
Tuesday. Mm-hmm.
I can only imagine what it was like to go back into that building after everything that had happened to you on the previous Friday.
Mm-hmm.
How was your work and life different after the assassination?
It was a lot of processing what we had seen. There was still a lot of talk, a lot of non-belief, but the FBI came into the building and set up offices. It seemed like that they were very present. They called us in and they took our stories and asked us where we were, how we knew Lee, and that sort of thing. But I think I told you at one time, Stephen, that I felt that I had been interviewed multiple times. And in fact, the FBI records showed that I'd only been interviewed once. And I thought a lot about that, and I think it was just because their presence was so ominous, that it felt like more. One morning I got to work early, and one of the FBI agents came in, and there were a couple of us that were in the office, and he asked us if we wanted to go up to the site where they suspect that Lee shot him from. And so they took us to the 6th floor. He took us to the 6th floor and showed us that window, which was directly above my desk.
You had never been to the 6th floor at all in
No.
the whole time you'd worked at the building?
No, we weren't allowed up there. The office workers weren't allowed up there. So this was the first time, and the FBI agent took us up there and showed us where Lee had arranged the boxes and everything around the window.
Let's take a look at that. There's a color photograph of the sniper's nest. So this FBI agent just took you and a couple of the girls?
Yeah, a couple of young girls.
Was he flirting with you?
I don't know.
That's what it sounds like, an FBI agent taking you to a crime scene.
Maybe not flirting, maybe trying to impress, and we were impressed.
Okay. Now, as I understand it, it was very difficult. Not only did you have the news media and you had law enforcement coming in and out of the building, but there were also tourists from the very beginning.
There were tourists from the very beginning. I specifically remember one time Lee Harvey's mother came, and she came in, and evidently there was nothing to keep anybody from coming in. The building was still open for business. But Mrs. Oswald came in, and she was going up and down the hallway yelling that her son was being framed, and that her son did not kill the president. And finally, someone came and pulled her away. Wow. But she was there for quite a while before someone was able to come get her.
At one point, they started locking those front doors.
They had to after that.
How were you able to get in and out?
I don't remember if we had. I think there must have just been someone. I don't remember if we had special passes. I know the doors were locked, but I don't remember how we got in. It was a long time ago, Stephen.
I know. Now, the rest of the country moves on. 1963 turns into 1964, But you're still working here in the Texas School Book Depository where the assassination is a very real thing on a daily basis. Was it depressing? Was there a dark pall that was over this building?
The atmosphere had definitely changed. Because all of the ladies that worked in my office, we all came to the depository the same way, right out of high school, that kind of thing. And so things were very cheerful among us. A couple of them little girls had just gotten married, and things were much more somber after the assassination. It just wasn't the same kind of atmosphere.
And you decided not to stay.
I decided not to stay.
When did you leave?
I think it was around May or June. I think I had put in just about a year, not long after the assassination. I mean, not long after the opening of the next year, 64.
And the assassination factored into your decision to leave?
It did. It did. I just wanted away from it.
Is this one of those things, obviously you won't ever escape it, but is this one of those things where you get contacted by, to this day, researchers, students asking questions because you were there, you were an eyewitness?
I do. There was a period that I didn't talk about it a lot, and then it was okay, and I did talk about it. And then I just decided I didn't want to talk about it again in my adult age. Don't know why, but there were periods where I would and I wouldn't. And so where I work now, I've been there for almost 19 years, and it took me 10 years before I let anybody know that I had witnessed the assassination. And the questions still come. People still want to know, what did you see? What did you hear? We had a conference here where a lot of our regional directors came into Dallas for a conference, and the company wanted me to come and to talk to them and tell them of my experience. We set up an event here on the 7th floor, and the company wanted me to come. So still get asked a lot about it.
Is there a burden of history associated with that? Because there are so few of the actual eyewitnesses to the assassination left. You were one of the youngest that was out there. So do you feel like this is something that you're going to continue to talk about for the rest of your life?
I think so. I think history is important, and I think it's important for others to it's history to you now, but it's things that you need to know that there's people's lives really impacted by those events, and kind of put yourself in their situation as you study history, or as you listen to politicians now. Think about the events that happened in the past and hope you will make better decisions because of it.
And that is sort of the thesis statement of the living history programs we do. That's why we do these things. I want to give you guys a chance to ask some questions of Karen. If you have questions about her eyewitness account or her work here in the building, if you'll just raise your hand. We are recording this for our YouTube channel, so I'll repeat your question before she answers it. Yeah, don't be shy.
I think that's a very good question.
For the camera, let me repeat
Okay.
that. So you said you didn't vote for, or you wouldn't have voted for Kennedy had you been old enough to vote in 1960. Did your impressions of him, did your feelings about him and people your age shift after his death?
There's a difference between politics and compassion. And I think that it was the politics that I was influenced by at the time that did not change the compassion for what that family was going through or for the horror of the event. But I think the biggest change for me, and maybe for others, was trying to be more open-minded as we studied politics, or being more aware of how strongly some people felt about it, like Lee, that he would take such drastic measures.
Good question.
Yes.
Other questions?
How do you feel about the
Political environment today compared to the political environment of early 1960s?
Much the same, only more so. Lots of stuff being brought against President Kennedy about why he shouldn't be president. And I think that we still have politics in the United States. It's just more vicious now, perhaps, than it was then. It felt vicious at the time that he shouldn't be president because he was Catholic. But now then it's just gotten so much more vicious, you know. But it's the same, only more so, if that makes sense.
You said that whenever you first heard the shot, you thought it was a backfiring car, but everything started to move in slow motion. When did you finally realize that this was like an attack on the president, not just some other thing?
I think that as the seconds went by and the second shot was fired, it became very clear that this was not a gunshot, a backfired car. So it didn't take long, but that was my immediate response with the first shot.
Many eyewitnesses thought it was a motorcycle backfiring or firecrackers or something like that. So you're certainly in the majority of those who did not necessarily recognize that first noise as gunfire.
Yeah. I do get asked that a lot, and I still think that Lee did it.
So the question was, what do you think? Who do you think is responsible? You think Oswald did it
I do.
by himself, or do you think there may have been help?
I think that Lee was influenced. I think that there were people behind Lee who was probably convincing him that he was going to play a great part in history. Or I just feel like there were influencers, but I think that Lee had the personality that he would make a good pawn. Okay. So I do think he did it by himself, but I do believe that there were influencers behind him.
Any other questions? Yeah.
What do you specifically think was his motive?
Lee's motive.
I don't know. I can answer that I answer that as it occurred, and I had no idea. I had no idea why he would kill the president, and I've read lots of books and watched lots of movies as to what his motives were. I've read books where they believe he was motivated or influenced through Cuba, through Mexico, through the mob. I have no way of knowing if any of those are true. And it never crossed my mind to know who was behind him at the time.
We have time for one more question.
A bunch of the JFK files were released recently in the past month and a half. I'm curious if you've read any of them.
The new Kennedy records that have just recently been released, they're slowly trickling out. Is this something that you have followed? Do you look at these new records as they come out?
I have not. I have followed that they have been released, and I would like to read them. I hear news stories where it's nothing, it's just administrative type papers, but I'd still like to read them for myself because I read everything I can get my hands on about the assassination. I do remember at the time, back in 63, 64, when they put the Warren Commission together, and I remember they said that they sealed up files for 50 years, and I remembered that. But I'm not sure if they are just administrative, just daily papers. Why would they have felt the need to seal them up for 50 years? So kind of confused about that. Would really like to read them just to be sure.
All right. Well, this has been great. Please join me in thanking Karen Scranton for being our guest today.